You're listening to the planet's memory, where time breathes and the Earth remembers. What if Earth once exhaled its last warm breath before falling into an ancient sleep? Before the ice there was breath, warm, invisible, stirring through forests that no longer stand. 1,000 summers shimmered across equatorial plains, and the oceans hummed with quiet life. But beneath this living hush, something shifted. Not in a roar, but in a murmur, a subtle tilt. A breath held a second too long. Above, the sky dimmed slowly, imperceptibly. Clouds began to thicken like a veil drawn over memory. Light, once clear and golden, took on a bluer hue, and shadows stretched longer than before. Something deep within the Earth, in the bones of its crust and the rhythm of its orbit, began to turn. This was not catastrophe. It was a sigh. Tectonic plates, those ancient, drifting slabs, whispered to one another across fault lines. Their speech was not language, but motion. They curled continents into new shapes, cradled seas in unfamiliar basins, lifted mountains from dust, and in that subtle rearrangement, ocean currents faltered, heat flowed less freely, and Earth, ever the slow dreamer, began to cool. Above the poles, snowfall thickened, not just for years but for centuries. Each flake landed without sound, layering stories upon stories in white. Glaciers stirred from slumber, creeping outward in silence, pressing into valleys, swallowing forests. The planet did not panic. It prepared. In the stillness of these forming glaciers, air was captured, tiny bubbles sealed in ice like breath trapped in crystal. Each one a record, each one a whisper of the world before the cold. Carbon ratios, oxygen isotopes, the signature of a vanished sky. And what of life? Some fled, some endured, some grew quiet and waited, sealed in spores or buried in mud. Beneath the ground, seeds curled tighter. Above it, mammoths trod across gathering snow, unaware they were leaving their bones to time. The warmth that once carried birds across hemispheres no longer came. Even sound seemed to hush, muffled beneath thickening air and falling frost. This was not the first time Earth had cooled, not the first time warmth gave way to stillness. But something about this slumber felt deeper, longer. We imagine ice as absence, but it was presence. Ice that sculpted, ice that remembered, ice that carved history into stone and held it. It thickened for tens of thousands of years, growing not like flame but like thought, slow, deliberate, relentless. We do not always see the moment sleep begins, and Earth in its ancient intelligence did not resist. It welcomed the silence. It curled into itself, let its breath slow, let the crust ache and fold beneath the weight, let time pool in layers, let the glaciers write. Fossils would come later, but in this moment, the planet was simply closing its eyes. The ice would come to cover entire continents, stretch from pole to nearly equator, lock oceans in pause. But it began here, with one breath, one tilt, one long forgetting, and beneath that forgetting, something else waited. Because this wasn't death, not exactly. It was a kind of sleep, old, planetary, complete. And yet, if this much can be forgotten, what else might still be dreaming beneath us? From that silence the first snow began to fall, not the kind that melts by morning or softens under footsteps, but a snow older than memory, crystalline, endless, and without apology. It did not flutter, it settled. Above the shifting lands, the sun grew pale, its warmth strained through high, silvery clouds that refused to move. The angle of light bent lower with each passing century, casting long blue shadows across plains that once held warmth. And still the snow came, layer after layer. The sky laid down its quiet offering, flake upon flake, each one a frozen fragment of atmosphere, locking air, dust and breath into its tiny vault. A living record built in white, Time did not pass above these lands. It settled into place, whole landscapes vanished beneath it. Lakes now quieted under heavy stillness, forests erased leaf by leaf, their branches sealed in ice like reaching hands frozen mid-thought. Creatures walked through this world, unaware that their last exhale would be captured forever, etched into the frost like a sigh too delicate for stone. Some of them lingered in the cold, adapted to the slow rhythm of snow, their fur thick and their bones heavy with memory. Others vanished, leaving only footprints that filled with ice, then froze, then disappeared. Extinction did not roar, it whispered. This snow was not passive, it was sculptor and historian. Its weight crushed valleys into shape. It dragged mountains, reformed rivers. It carried within it tiny shards of glass from distant volcanoes, pollen from now extinct trees, ash from fires that flickered out before names were spoken. In its deepest layers, miles down, there were summers that no longer had meaning, and winters that never ended. Isotopes locked in the snow tell us of carbon shifts, of methane loops, of a sky gasping to adapt. The Earth was rewriting its atmosphere in slow spirals, buried in white, and still the snow fell, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as a kind of remembering. Because in each flake there was precision, a symmetry only cold can teach, hexagonal silence, molecular grace, a crystalline language carved by temperature, pressure, time. It was here, in these frozen libraries, that the Earth began to dream deeper. The dreams were not of cities or of fire, but of balance, of breath slowed to match the stars, of silence thick enough to hold weight. And even now we bore into those layers, with drills and samples and careful breath. We listen to what the snow still holds. We find acid pulses from distant comet tails. We read the soot of ancient wildfires. We decode the atmosphere's shifting dialect. But the snow does not speak quickly. It remembers slowly. And we wonder how much is left buried. What names did we never learn? Now fossilized not in bone but in the structure of frost. What breath still lingers in the tiniest bubbles? The last exhale of a creature who never knew it was the last. The empires of frost still stand in memory, though their towers were made of snowdrifts, and their walls of ice sheets that stretched for continents. No flags flew above them, no voices echoed within, but their silence endures. Snow outlasted the sun that warmed the earth when life was young. It endured beneath twilight skies, through magnetic reversals, and tilted orbits, through famine and fire and flood, and it remains not in the air but deep below, where light cannot reach, still cold, still waiting, still holding the breath of the world. Maybe the earth hasn't finished remembering us yet, and beneath that remembering warmth still lingered, not in the air but in memory. It was hidden deep below the slow parade of snow, in layers untouched by sky for tens of millions of years. The ice was thick, but the land beneath had once been green, not pale or sparse, but bursting. Before glaciers claimed the north and south, jungles flourished in places now lost to frost, trees the size of cathedrals, their trunks wound with ancient vines, insects larger than hands, wet air, humming with life. And now that life is stone, pressed into shale and coal, fossilized beneath pressures that reshape time itself, these once living forms remain. Their veins of carbon trace outlines of ferns, their skeletal impressions imprinted like ghosts onto ancient seabeds turned dry. What once soaked in sunlight is now inked into darkness. In Antarctica, yes, even there, scientists have uncovered fossilized forests, root systems, growth rings, traces of pollen that tell of springtime in what is now a kingdom of snow. Leaves that once opened to warmth now lie folded forever in silence. And still, they are there. The warmth they knew is gone but not erased. In their cellular patterns we find remnants of atmosphere, clues of a planet that once breathed differently. Back then, carbon was more than threat. It was food. Back then, ice was a stranger. Geology holds this paradox, that what we see today is not always what was. The rocks remember. Sedimentary strata build like thoughts, layer upon layer, recording moments with quiet devotion. Volcanic ash falls, settles and hardens. Riverbeds meander, then vanish, leaving behind soft outlines in red stone, and in some layers, the ones we almost overlook, lie the fossils of forgotten warmth. Dragonflies sealed in amber, seeds curled into sandstone, entire forests petrified mid-breath. But fossils are not merely shapes. They are time suspended. They are warmth captured in the moment it was lost. The earth does not hoard these memories. It offers them slowly. A cliff erodes here, revealing a fern no human has ever seen. A landslide uncovers an ancient fish, perfectly preserved in shale. Even coal burned now for fuel is made of this forgotten jungle breath. It is fossil sunlight, buried photosynthesis. We extract it, ignite it, and in doing so, release warmth once trapped beneath the cold. We are burning the ghosts of warmth to make our own. But those ghosts are not angry. They are quiet, beneath the glaciers, beneath the sediment, beneath the rising oceans. These fossils remain. They do not reach for the surface. They simply rest, like thoughts tucked in the folds of an old mind. And sometimes in the softest layers of clay, we find not bones but dreams. Imprints of things too soft to fossilize, but too persistent to disappear. The suggestion of a petal, the outline of a feather. These are not echoes, they are footprints in time, and perhaps they are not finished, because life does not forget where it once thrived. Seeds sleep for centuries, spores drift unseen, DNA waits in permafrost, patient as stone. We often speak of extinction as an ending, but the earth doesn't speak in endings, it speaks in transformations, and what was once warm may rise again, not as it was, but as it remembers itself becoming. So we dig, we study, we trace carbon through stone and wonder what came before. Not just the creatures, but the climates, the feelings, the stillness, and deep beneath the ice, the fossils remain, not just as remnants of life, but as evidence that warmth never truly disappears. It waits, and still, what if those dreams stir beneath the surface? The glaciers above them did not sleep quietly. Even in the silence they moved, slow as centuries, vast as continents. The ice shifted forward, then fell back, like lungs breathing in cycles older than language. These were not smooth drifts, but heavy creaking pulses, a rhythm drawn not in seconds but in millennia. The ice did not simply rest atop the land. It carved it, it whispered in weight. With each glacial advance, pressure increased until bedrock yielded. Valleys were deepened, ridges were swallowed. The earth's crust, though ancient and solid, bent under the cold's insistence, and when the ice retreated, it did not leave quietly. It tore, it screamed, it wept meltwater in sudden floods, carving paths through stone with the force of memory unleashed. We think of glaciers as frozen, but they are motion. Their advance is invisible to our daily eyes. But in the scale of deep time they surge like tides. Gravity pulls them downhill. Friction fights back. Meltwater beneath acts as a lubricant, letting ice skate on its own breath. Sometimes they surge forward suddenly, a glacial earthquake called a yokel halp, sending ice and water roaring through the landscape, and then they return to stillness, as if nothing had happened. Mountains groaned beneath this push and pull. Rock cracked open. Ice flowed into the wounds. Valleys, once mere impressions, yawned wider and deeper. Fjords were born, and within these transformations, echoes were born too. Not echoes of sound, but of pressure, form, shape. The earth remembered where the ice had pressed. When it melted, those impressions remained. U-shaped valleys, striations on exposed granite, lakes cradled in bowls where glaciers once slept. We walk through these places now. We sail through glacial fjords. We hike across moraines, ridges made not by builders but by the ice's edge. We look at boulders left stranded in fields and call them erratics, as if they were strange. But they are not strange. They are signatures. The earth is not just shaped by fire, it is carved by coal. And when we listen closely through seismographs, through radar pulses, through ice core vibrations, we hear something deeper, a slow, creaking dialogue. The glacial pulse is still ongoing. In Greenland, in Antarctica, in the high mountains of Patagonia and Asia, ice still moves. It still speaks, and its language is changing. Warming accelerates retreat. The rhythm falters. The beat skips. Ice thins not in centuries but in years. Valleys receive water before they are ready. Seas rise with melt that should have taken lifetimes. And in that accelerated loss, the earth remembers too quickly. The echoes grow louder. We call them feedback loops, positive amplification, albedo shifts, methane releases. But beneath the science is a simpler truth. The glaciers are no longer whispering, they are gasping, but still there is beauty. In every retreating tongue of ice we find a story. We read layers like chapters, dust from distant deserts, soot from ancient fires, bubbles of air from when mammoths breathed, and below the glaciers as they pull back, we uncover the forgotten forests, blackened and preserved, fossils never seen by human eyes, riverbeds reawakened. This is not just loss, it is revelation. The echoes that rise are not cries for help, but remnants of a deeper memory, a conversation between time and matter, and in some distant way, we are part of it. Our carbon joins the cycle, our breath lingers in the atmosphere, our actions accelerate the rhythm. We are no longer just listeners, we are part of the pulse, and so the earth continues, folding these new layers into its archives, a thin line of ash, a spike in temperature, a sudden melt. These are the echoes we will leave behind, not just in stone, but in the shape of the land, in the rhythm of the glaciers. And maybe those echoes are not done speaking, for even as the glaciers whispered across stone and time, they buried more than valleys, they buried memory, in bone. Not all who walked through the breath of early snow escaped its closing hand. Beneath the thickest sheets, sealed in silence and shadow, lie the remains of those who paused too long, creatures who never reached the edge of the coming cold. They did not know they were vanishing. There were no last words, no farewells, only a long, slow stillness that overtook them. Now their skeletons sleep beneath miles of ice, untouched by sun, unknown to calendars. Mammoths with curled trunks, frozen mid-motion, cave lions with jaws slack, caught between steps, tiny birds, still feathered, held in postures of flight that never landed. Some lie whole, skin, muscle, even eyes, perfectly preserved. Others have dissolved into fragments, a jawbone here, a toe buried in meltwater mud, but all carry a story paused mid-thought, because the ice did not erase them. It held them, not as ruins, but as intentions, lives suspended at the threshold between two earths, one warm, one cold. Glacial tombs are not like graves. They do not rot or return. They preserve. They lock molecules in place. They stop bacteria. They hush decay. These bones beneath the silence are not lifeless. They are waiting. In Siberia, permafrost thaws now at alarming speed. With each meter lost, something older is revealed. The curled limbs of a foal, its last breath held in ancient air. A wolf pup, its fur still soft, its mouth still full of milk teeth. A human child, wrapped in mammoth hide. We study them, gently. We measure collagen, test DNA, radiocarbon date each breath. We ask them where they walked, what they ate, what sky they looked upon. And they answer not in words but in isotopes, in proteins, in the cold script of preservation. The truth is, they still hold warmth, not heat, but origin. Their cells, though dormant, still hewn with information. Information that tells us how climate moved, how ecosystems folded, how extinction came not as thunder but as fog. In Greenland's core, we find not just ice, but pollen, not just dust, but insect wings. We find what they touched, what touched them. We find the fingerprints of an entire vanished world. And through it all, the silence holds, because the deepest ice does not crackle. It mutes. It smooths time into a slow and seamless drift. Years blend. Bones harden. Identity dissolves into structure. These are not museum pieces. They are memories. And they are waking because the ice is thinning. The breath of warmth returns, and with it, bones rise again, not alive, but present. The question we ask again and again is simple. Do they remember? Does the ice remember their last breath? The way air remembers lightning, or stone remembers flood, perhaps. Or perhaps it's not memory at all, but resonance. Perhaps the planet, in holding these shapes for so long, has allowed them to echo through time in ways we are only now beginning to hear. A tusk emerging from the thaw, a skull found in the melt, a heart still full of grass. These are not accidents, they are messages. And what they tell us is not just about extinction, but about return, about what it means to pause without ending, to sleep, but not be forgotten, to remain intact, even as the world above changes. These creatures did not see the age that came after, but perhaps they shaped it. Their breath now mixes with ours. Their stories once buried rise into science, into imagination, into awe, and so we kneel in the mud beside them. We lift each fragment with care, and we listen, and still does the ice remember their last breath. It does, and not just in bones or frozen lungs, but in the breath itself, in the air, trapped like thought in crystal, far beneath the surface, beneath miles of compression and centuries of snowfall, lie bubbles, tiny pockets of atmosphere, sealed since the age of mammoths, or even before. Air that once moved through forests, now extinct. Air once drawn into the lungs of creatures we no longer name. These bubbles hold the sky's memory, and when we bring them to light, slicing deep into glacial cores and gently releasing what's been held in silence, the past exhales. But the language is delicate. It speaks in ratios: oxygen 16, oxygen 18, carbon 12, carbon 13, nitrogen, argon, methane, each isotope a note in a symphony played over ice, written in time instead of sound. The composition tells us the temperature of ancient summers, the height of the troposphere, the breath of volcanoes, the sigh of plankton, and in these tiny signatures we find something strange, atmospheres that do not match our own, not just cooler, but different, denser, simpler. There was a time when the sky felt heavier, when oxygen levels surged, feeding dragonflies the size of crows, when methane spiked and warmed the world before collapsing into glacial sleep, when the carbon balance shifted, not because of us, but because the earth itself turned its face to change. We read this now with quiet awe, not from books, but from ice, from snow that fell 100,000 years ago, capturing air like pressed flowers, and through that chemistry, a portrait emerges, a planet that inhaled in slow rhythmic cycles, sometimes warmer, sometimes colder, always changing, and yet always holding pattern until now, because in the most recent layers, the symphony breaks, the ratios fracture, carbon climbs without reason, methane leaps, the atmosphere grows thick with new notes, synthetic, erratic, human. We have entered the score, altering the melody. And though the past cannot answer, it can show us how the sky once sang. Imagine a world where the air was clearer, not just clean but sparse, stripped of the noise we now exhale. That sky knew silence. It filtered starlight with less distortion. It carried pollen more gently. It let rain fall more slowly, more purely. We find traces of that sky in the way snowflakes formed, in the speed at which crystals grew, in the angle of their arms. Even the ice speaks of air's texture, and what it tells us is simple. The sky has changed, not just in shape, but in self. Its memory is long, but its balance is delicate. In Greenland and Antarctica, scientists release ancient air into instruments that sing their own songs of analysis. Mass spectrometers hum with revelation. Peaks and troughs on quiet screens tell us about epochs we cannot touch, but can almost hear. This is not poetry, it is precision. And yet, what a beautiful thing to read the sky like scripture. To hear the breath of the planet, held in bubbles the size of raindrops, and to know that even air forgets, that it changes, bends, becomes something else, that what we breathe now is not what they breathed then, and what comes next is still being written, molecule by molecule. But the old air, the lost sky, still waits beneath our feet. It is not gone. It is archived, a living record in ice. A sky that once cradled different stars, different winds. A sky that never knew us, but held our becoming. And when we listen closely, we can almost hear it, not as sound, but as resonance. A different music, a different breath, and maybe the sky once sang a different song. A quieter one where light was not scattered by smog or thinned by warmth, but fell gently unbroken across continents of snow. But light, too, has weight, not mass in the way we measure stone or blood, but a presence, a gravity of attention, and when it meets ice, it doesn't disappear. It slows, it softens, it bends its path. Beneath the surface of glaciers, light becomes a different thing, not the brightness of day, but the blueness of time, filtered, refracted, absorbed, until only the faintest trace remains, like the memory of warmth in a room long cold. When we look into that ice, especially where it's cleanest, clearest, deepest, we see a kind of inner glow, not from within, but from the outside, light stretched thin, pressed under weight, turned inward. In these spaces, shadows have no sharpness. They drift like breath, and whole seasons vanish. Spring, summer, even autumn leave no clear trace, only winter's permanence remains. And yet, light changes what it touches. Even when it barely arrives, in Greenland at the bottom of blue ice caves, you can see it, how sunlight from above finds a way through 40 meters of frozen time. The blue deepens to indigo, to ultramarine, until it almost forgets it was once golden. But light remembers, even trapped. It moves molecules. It nudges ice crystals to rearrange. It warms by fractions of fractions, helping shape the slow drip of melt deep below. In Antarctica, near the poles where the sun disappears for months at a time, the return of light doesn't just mark a new season, it awakens motion. Microbial life under the ice begins to stir. Algae long dormant shimmer green beneath frozen lakes. Permafrost softens, rivers remember how to flow, all because the weight of light has returned. But perhaps light never truly left. Perhaps it lingers, even in the deepest places, even where we cannot see it. There are theories that trapped photons, light unable to escape dense crystalline matrices, may still hum faintly, their energy diffused but not gone, that in some slow and hidden way, sunlight remains alive beneath the cold. What would it mean to warm something over centuries, to wait, to press, to persist through layers of silence? Maybe that is what light does best. It finds paths into the heart of ice, And though it cannot speak, it listens. Though it cannot move quickly, it influences. Though it cannot last, it leaves impression. And those impressions matter. In the structure of glacial layers, we find faint patterns, seasonal bands marked by the slight advance of summer warmth, etched in the way light once touched snow. These aren't records of temperature alone, they are records of light's insistence. Even frozen, even bound, light leaves fingerprints, and we who walk above these layers forget sometimes that the world below us is not in darkness. It glows faintly, subtly, with scattered beams that began their journey before we were born. Imagine a photon born in the sun, traveling across space, filtered by atmosphere, softened by cloud, finally landing upon a glacier. There, instead of being reflected or absorbed, it passes through, into the deep. It refracts, it bends, it slows, but it does not vanish. Instead, it becomes part of the ice. It warms a layer by a fraction of a degree. It shifts a crystal into a slightly different orientation. It starts a melt that will continue for days, and then it's gone. But what it touched is changed. So perhaps the weight of light is not about brightness, but persistence. The ability to remain not in form but in effect, like memory, like breath, like the warm trace a hand leaves on cold glass beneath the glaciers, under pressure and time. Light continues, not as glow but as influence. And maybe frozen sunlight still warms something deep below, because beneath the weight of all that ice, beneath the silence of frozen centuries and the glacial hush of white dominion, something moved. Not fast, not loud, but steadily. Tectonic plates, those great drifting slabs of the Earth's crust, never stopped, even while ice slept above, even while life waited and light dimmed. The foundation of the world kept shifting. It's easy to imagine the planet under ice as still, as if all motion ceased when the frost arrived. But deep down, beneath the lithosphere, in the soft mantle currents, heat continued to circulate. Heat that came from the Earth itself, the fading warmth of formation, the constant decay of radioactive elements, the slow churning of the interior, and with that heat came motion. The continents, even blanketed by miles of cold, glided on currents of rock that moved like syrup, colliding, separating, twisting, ever so slowly. Under the glaciers, mountain ranges still rose, fault lines still trembled, ocean ridges spread open, inch by inch, birthing new seafloor in the quiet dark. Like dancers cloaked in silence, the continents moved across the globe in ancient patterns, sometimes drawing near, sometimes drifting apart. Their rhythm was slow, but it never ceased. During some of Earth's greatest ice ages, entire supercontinents gathered beneath a sky of frost. Gondwana, Rodinia, Pannotia. They formed not in heat, but beneath chill. They slid into place beneath silent snow. They folded into each other with the grace of inevitability, and in their wake, they left scars, suture zones, cretons, terranans, fossilized seams in stone marking where land once kissed land, where mountains were born in collision, then ground down by glacial breath. Even frozen, Earth had heartbeat. Seismic waves traveled through ice-covered crust, rippling through stone like murmurs in sleep. Volcanoes rumbled under ice sheets, their heat melting tunnels beneath the frozen shell, forming hidden rivers of steam and ash. In Iceland, in Antarctica, in the buried heat of Siberia, fire lived beneath the frost. This is how the Earth breathes, not in lungs but in motion, and that motion never ends. It was happening even as mammoths walked across continents that no longer touch, even as snow fell for centuries, even as light bent through blue ice and froze into silence. The plates moved on, and now we see their trails. Striations in bedrock reveal ancient pushes, tilted strata tell of uplift beneath ice. Marine fossils high in Himalayan rock whisper of continents once submerged. The dance is long, so long that it blurs time itself. But we, standing on these shifting plates, feel none of it. We walk on stone we call solid, yet it floats, it fractures, it flows. Continents are not destinations, they are waypoints, moments in the choreography of planetary drift. And ice, for all its stillness, could not stop the dance. In fact, it joined it. Glaciers, heavy with time, added pressure. Their weight bent the lithosphere downward. When they melted, the land rebounded, slowly, elastically, like breath returning to a chest. This is called isostatic rebound, a rising of forgotten land. Even today, Scandinavia continues to lift from the release of ice that vanished 10,000 years ago. The Earth, it seems, has memory in its bones, and so the motion continues. Not just in fire or quake, but in this deep ballet of crust and time, a dance so slow we only see it in retrospect, in maps redrawn, in coastlines shifted, in the fossil trails of animals who followed one landmass into another, unaware they were walking between drifting worlds. Ice comes, ice goes, but the rhythm remains, and perhaps what we call glaciation is not an end, but a resting point, a soft interlude in the deeper song of tectonic drift, not a stillness, but a pause, not a silence, but a breath. And maybe ice is not the end, but a pause in the rhythm. Because beneath the coldest stillness, something continued to flow, something soft, persistent, almost forgotten. The rivers. They did not vanish when the glaciers came. They simply changed their form, their path, their voice, no longer roaring over rocks or glinting in sunlight. They slipped beneath the weight of ice, not lost but hidden. These were the subglacial rivers, the sleeping arteries of the earth. Pressed under kilometers of frozen time, they whispered instead of ran, fed by the slow warmth from within the earth and the melting of the ice above. They carved secret tunnels through the darkness. They curled like thoughts beneath pressure, etching memory into stone and ice alike. And though we couldn't see them, they were there, flowing between silence and gravity, moving silt, shaping voids, eroding the very glaciers that pressed down upon them. These rivers did not need permission to exist. They did not wait for sunlight or spring. They moved in their own time, in their own way, slow but certain. Sometimes they pooled, forming hidden lakes beneath the ice, perfectly still for centuries, their surfaces untouched by wind or sky. Other times they surged forward, in sudden floods that lifted whole sections of glacier and shifted the land beneath. And we only learned to hear them recently, through seismic echoes, radar pulses, satellite tremors. We found their shapes traced in reflections. We mapped their silence. We gave them names: Lake Vostok, Lake Willen, basin after basin of invisible water, hundreds of meters deep, thousands of years old, water that has never seen the open air, water that holds ancient life, or the last remnants of it. And still the rivers move. Even in sleep, they shape the world. They smooth the undersides of glaciers, influence how fast the ice flows. They leave behind eskers, winding ridges of sediment deposited like veins through the land. They guide the direction of future valleys, unseen architects of what will one day be. Some of the oldest landscapes on Earth were shaped by rivers like these, long before ice came, long after it retreats. Even now, under melting glaciers, new paths form. Water seeks the lowest point, always, and maybe it seeks something else too. A way back to what once was, a memory of flow. Because rivers are more than water, they are motion. They are time, softened into liquid. They are history, written without words. And under the ice, that history remains. We have followed their traces, found pollen in the mud beneath them, found isotopes that tell us when they last saw the open sky. Some of them have not surfaced in over 1 million years, but perhaps they remember, not in thought, but in path, not in memory, but in shape. Where a river once ran, another is likely to follow, even after ice, even after silence, because water is patient, and sleep is not the same as stillness. The rivers wait beneath the surface. They trace old lines across buried continents. They carry secrets no ocean knows. And maybe, just maybe, those secrets are maps, not to places but to times, to climates, to rhythms, to forgotten warmth. One day when the ice lifts, they may speak again, not in roar but in return, and we listening from above may finally hear the fullness of their song. And yet, could their silence hold maps to what came before? It's in the silence that we begin to hear it, a long, aching groan, a ripple through the body of the glacier, a crack, not sudden but inevitable, beneath the glassy surface of ice sheets, beneath the clean blue of ancient cold, crevice open, not all at once, not always visible, but they are there, fractures, fissures, voices in tension. We think of glaciers as solid, silent, still, but they are always in motion, and where there is motion under pressure, there is breaking, not in chaos, but in ritual. Crevasses form when the ice pulls apart, stretched by gravity, by flow, by time. Some are shallow, some cut down hundreds of feet, splitting the glacier with a wound so narrow you could step across it and fall forever. These are not scars, they are openings, openings through which the Earth's memory escapes. Inside them, cold air churns, moisture collects, walls shimmer in translucent blue, layers of snowfall crushed and crystallized, pressed into sheets so dense they've forgotten how to reflect light. And as the ice moves, these cracks widen, they twist, they collapse, new ones form beside them, a chorus of rupture beneath the slow drift of time. The sound of a glacier cracking is unlike anything else. It's not a sharp snap, but a deep, echoing pulse. It rolls through the ice like a low note through bone, a kind of frozen thunder, a whisper stretched across centuries. Scientists call them ice quakes. They come without warning, they reveal stress the glacier can no longer bear. But the glacier doesn't stop. It continues on, reshaping, healing, shifting its weight. Every crack is a release, and a message of change, of weight adjusted, of time remembered. Through crevices, we see what the ice contains: dust from volcanic eruptions, trapped gas bubbles, ancient soot, even meteorite particles, fallen silently onto frozen ground. Sometimes we see the past, other times we fall into it, because not all crevices are empty. Some are filled with meltwater, clear as glass, moving slowly downward. Others echo with the sound of drip, 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 a rhythm that hasn't changed in 10,000 years. To descend into a glacial crevasse is to fall into layers of time. It is not an abyss, it is a scroll, folded, pressed, slightly torn. And those torn places matter. They reveal what force is hidden. We study the patterns, how crevices form in parallel lines across ice sheets, how their spacing, their shape, their depth, all tell us something about the glacier's flow, the slope of the land beneath, the pressure from above. They are not random, they are structured expression. And so we map them, we model them, we send down microphones and radar pulses to hear what the surface cannot tell us, because cracks speak, and though their language is fractured, it is not meaningless. It is raw, honest, unfiltered. Pressure builds over centuries. The glacier holds it, and then it yields, not in collapse, but in release, not in ruin, but in voice. What emerges is a signal, one we are only just learning to understand. And what if that understanding changes us? Because deep inside the Earth's frozen heart, these whispers become songs, They resonate through the body of the ice. They tell of movement, of collapse, of rebirth. A glacier cracks not to break, but to grow, to adapt, to respond to time's gentle violence. And perhaps so do we. Perhaps the fractures in memory, in history, in silence, are not just breaks, but beginnings, ways for something deeper to rise, to be seen, to be felt. The glacier does not fear the crack. It opens to it. It lets it become part of its evolution. And so, as we listen to the ice, to its low, aching songs, we may realize we are not hearing the end. We are hearing the process. We are hearing the world reshaping itself through pressure and time. And maybe we've only heard the softest part of their story, because not every part of the past reached the ground. Some of it hovered, suspended in the cold hush of sky, waiting to fall, but never did. There were clouds in those ancient glacial skies, slow, heavy, silver with moisture. They formed like any other, drawn upward by heat, thickened by altitude, darkened with promise. But the warmth that once beckoned rain to earth was gone. The air was too cold, the surface too sealed in ice, so the rain stayed aloft. It began to fall, but froze before its descent could finish, caught in the liminal space between atmosphere and land. Each droplet hardened into crystal, tiny frozen oaths suspended mid-breath. Some fell as snow, some drifted sideways in the arms of wind, scattering like pale dust across glaciers, but some simply never arrived. This was the rain that never fell, moisture erased from history by an age of sleep, not gone, but suspended, not forgotten, but filed away in the sky's quiet archives. In the ice cores we drill today, we find their echoes, thin bands of isotopic lightness, layers of dust with no matching melt, minute traces of water that never reached the soil. We see what didn't happen. And from that absence, a story appears. A story not just of cold, but of denial, of the hydrological cycle paused mid-step, of clouds carrying water no root would drink, even the oceans waited. Evaporation slowed, condensation lingered, the whole planet held its breath, and yet, within that stillness, the unfallen water endured, locked in high clouds, trapped in the breath of snowflakes, stored in layers of ice, compacted and quiet, like glass jars of weather from a world that never thawed. We speak often of rivers and lakes, of glaciers and seas, but the water in the air matters just as deeply. It's not just atmosphere, it's memory, it's promise. Moisture drifting across continents carries seeds, heat, salt. It speaks to forests, to deserts, to distant coasts. It connects worlds through vapor, and when that water doesn't fall, something is missed. A forest never fed, a fire never quenched, a stream never born. These aren't catastrophes, they are absences, moments withheld, and yet the Earth remembered them anyway. In Antarctica, faint isotopic signatures show years where snow came too light to record, years when the clouds passed overhead full but silent. In Siberia, frozen soils reveal moisture never absorbed, the ghosts of rainfall that never touched the leaves. Even now, in the upper layers of permafrost, trapped vapor waits, tiny, ancient, weightless. It is not rain, not anymore, but it was almost. We wonder, does that rain still linger in the breath of ice, not as droplets, but as longing, as the echo of descent never finished? Perhaps in some deep, still chamber of glacier, where air bubbles curl in silent loops, the unfallen rain still drifts. Perhaps in every thawing flake, some part of it is being released, not as history, but as possibility. Rain is more than water. It is return, it is reunion between sky and ground, and when that reunion is denied, the balance waits in pause. The ice has carried that pause for thousands of years, but now, as warmth returns, The cycle stirs, and what never fell may yet find its path. What was once denied may begin to descend, and in the breath of new storms, we may hear the whisper of that ancient promise, not in thunder, not in flood, but in soft, persistent rain, completing what was once withheld. And yet, what if that rain still lingers in the breath of ice? Because ice, for all its silence and stillness, is not a blankness. It is a structure, an architecture sculpted in slowness, an elegance built from cold. When we peer into it, not with eyes alone, but through microscopes and polarizing lenses, we see it unfold. Symmetry, geometry, a frozen cathedral of sixfold forms. Each snowflake begins this way, not as chaos, but as intention. A vapor molecule bonds to a seed of dust, then builds outward, repeating itself in precision, branching and curling into the cold's quiet logic. By the time it joins a glacier, that snowflake has become part of something vast, pressed into others, recrystallized, refined. And yet the pattern remains, even in the thickest ice sheets, miles beneath the surface, where pressure warps everything soft. The architecture endures. It's not random, it's not wild, it is a palace of patience. Glaciers are not solid blocks, but woven masses of interlocking crystal grains, each one aligned, bent, squeezed into slow harmony. Some crystals stretch meters across, others fracture and rotate under strain. The deeper the ice, the more aligned they become, as if time and weight are sculpting them into direction, into intention. Cold is not the absence of design. It is design slowed to stillness. We find layers like floor tiles in frozen halls. We see fracture planes, clean and geometric. We study how light moves through them, bending, refracting, reframing itself. Every crystal acts like a prism, every bubble like a window. The glacier is not mute. It is a gallery of symmetry, of trapped air, of sacred quiet. When we move through ice caves, deep beneath the surface, we walk through arches shaped by melt and refreeze, corridors blue with filtered time, ceilings scalloped by ancient breath. These are the ruins of nothing. They are the architecture of persistence. Even in collapse, ice shapes space like memory shapes thought, holding form while changing, melting without losing meaning. And in these cold cathedrals there are echoes, not sound but something softer, a kind of ambient longing, as if the very molecules remember the skies they fell from, the clouds they once formed, the warmth they briefly knew before becoming this: a wall, a column, a vault. There is holiness here, not of faith, but of form, the recurring hexagon, the ordered branch, the spiral collapse. We call it crystallography, the study of shapes that repeat. But these are more than shapes. They are rituals. They are prayers carved in hydrogen bonds. We've only begun to understand them. How glacial ice, when compressed, releases sound. How vibrations travel differently through aligned crystals. How trapped light remembers the angle of snowfall. What else is locked within these walls? Is the glacier keeping record? Are these cathedrals echoing messages older than language, movements of tectonics etched into crystal flow, atmospheres sung in frozen chorus? Perhaps this is why we are drawn to them, why even the sound of a glacier's creak feels reverent. We are not just hearing ice, we are hearing structure under pressure, history made beautiful by constraint. To walk among it is to feel small, but welcomed, like a visitor in a place built for something larger than memory. And when a glacier carves, when its edge breaks and falls to the sea, we mourn not just loss, but architecture undone, a room that no longer holds its shape. A hymn interrupted mid-breath. Still, what remains is enough, enough to teach us, enough to move us, enough to make us wonder. What else lies in these crystalline halls? What languages sleep in the angles of their walls? What thoughts does a frozen cathedral keep when no one comes to pray? And maybe these cathedrals still hold prayers we cannot hear. But not all prayers are shaped in symmetry. Some are made of plastic, of circuits, of synthetic dyes and fractured glass. And they too are being buried far beneath the moss and lichen of the northern latitudes, where the sun barely rises and the earth remains locked in a restless winter. The permafrost stretches a frozen memory sealed into the soil. It has held mammoth bones, seeds from extinct flowers, spores, still viable after tens of thousands of years. And now it holds us, or at least the echo of us, the pieces we've left behind in our haste, our hunger, our forgetting. In shallow layers of thawing ground, archaeologists have begun to find the remnants, battery casings, polymers wrapped around ancient food, microplastics embedded in sediment that never knew machines, steel bolts rusted into bone-white quiet. We have entered the geological record. These are the technofossils, artifacts not shaped by biology, but by industry, objects that did not evolve, but were designed. A toothbrush, a gear, a signal tower's fragment, all resting now in the frozen soil like offerings. No one remembers placing. They are not yet ancient, and yet they've already begun to drift beyond our language. What happens when the permafrost keeps them longer than we do? What story will they tell to someone or something who comes after? Will they be read as evidence of intelligence or of imbalance? The planet has always recorded what we do in isotopes, in sediment, in the quiet layering of time. But now we've written in new materials, plastic agglomerates, stone fused with melted plastic, concrete infused with radioactive dust, carbon spikes in the ice cores, a layer of ash from combustion engines, burning old sunlight faster than the earth could replenish. These are our fossils now, not of bone but of behavior. And the permafrost has begun to catalogue them. It doesn't do so with judgment. It doesn't differentiate between a mammoth's tooth and a polymer straw. It simply keeps what it is given, freezing it in place, slowing decay, holding it for an audience that doesn't yet exist. We may imagine ourselves at the peak of civilization, but beneath the soil, the story is simpler. We are becoming strata, layered above the Pleistocene, beneath whatever comes next. We might be a pause, or a prelude, or a footnote in the long geologic hymn of Earth, and in 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 years, what will be found? A tablet that no longer lights, a ceramic filter, a perfectly preserved polymer button, uncracked, unaged, and the soil around it still thawing, still waking, still remembering. The irony is quiet. We once dug into permafrost to understand the past. Now the past may dig into us, not for who we were, but for what we left behind. We may become mystery, a civilization encased before it vanished or transcended. And how will the planet speak of us then? Will it mention the warmth we could not control, the machines we built faster than we understood, the seeds we scattered into silence? Or will it simply offer up our traces, layered in carbon and chromium, in plastic and decay, and let the next world wonder, because we have always wanted to be remembered? But we never asked what kind of memory we would become, and now the earth holds the answer, in a frozen archive of human residue, where moss will one day grow again, and roots may wrap gently around our remnants, pulling them back into the dream of soil. And maybe we already have. Because time beneath ice doesn't preserve everything. It selects, it softens, it forgets. Not in a single sweep, but in fragments. A corner of a wall remains, but the door is gone. A tooth, but not the voice that used it. The deeper the burial, the gentler the erasure. We think of glaciers as guardians of memory, and they are, but they are also editors. What they hold, they also reshape. Pressure compresses, freezing cracks, weight deforms. Over centuries, over millennia, the sharpness of detail dulls. A city beneath the ice does not remain a city. It becomes outline, contour, absence, stones shift, steel bends, wood becomes stain. Glacial amnesia isn't sudden, it's slow and ceremonial, a forgetting that feels like grace. It doesn't destroy, it dissolves. Under miles of ancient snow, identity becomes suggestion, edges blur, and soon what was once a person becomes a shadow of shape, a pause in the layering of time. We see this in places where the ice has retreated, where it once pressed down for ages, then lifted, leaving behind not fossils but echoes, soft soils shaped by weight, faint impressions where trees once stood, mineral traces of organisms long vanished. These are not memories, they are what remains after memory has left, and yet, in this amnesia, something else is born. Not clarity, but context, because the glacier doesn't forget everything. It forgets differently. It remembers weight. It remembers motion. It remembers pressure. And what it forgets is detail. The things we once thought mattered most. Names, symbols, language, tools. The ice has no use for our signs. It records shape, not meaning, and maybe that is its kindness. Because the forgetting makes room for rebirth, room for land to rise again, room for silence to settle in the places where noise once ruled. In a way, this is how the planet heals, not by remembering, but by releasing. And we who cling to permanence, who etch our initials into stone, who store everything in code, are slow to learn this. But the glacier teaches it gently. It reminds us that even the deepest impressions can fade, that even cities, when buried long enough, become sediment, and in their place, moss returns, water flows, light filters into new cracks. The forgetting is never cruel. It is simply how time makes space, and sometimes what survives is stranger than memory. A staircase leading nowhere, a footprint in lithified mud, a pattern in rock that was once a wall. We build timelines, but the earth does not follow them. It remembers in weight and forgets in lightness. And even that forgetting leaves its own kind of record, like a glacier that melts but leaves behind a lake, calm, reflective, bearing no resemblance to the ice that once ruled it, and yet still holding its shape. So we walk through these landscapes of partial forgetting. We see ruins softened to hills, roads erased by lichen, graves folded into pasture, and we begin to wonder, what else have we forgotten that the earth has already let go? And what in all our remembering have we missed in the beauty of release? Because to forget is not always to lose. Sometimes it is to transform, to let the form fade, so something deeper can rise. And maybe forgetting is also a kind of remembering, because not everything is remembered through movement. Some truths linger in the stillness between, in the quiet pause that stretches so long. We forget it's part of the story. There are spaces in Earth's memory where time does not roar or shatter or rise in fire. There are epochs that slip between others like a held breath, where change continues in silence and the world remakes itself in slow, unseen ways. We call them transitions, but they are more than that. They are the hoss between heartbeats, the blink between eras, a stillness thick with becoming. The glaciers know this silence well. For thousands of years the ice held its shape, advancing slowly, then pausing, waiting. During these stretches the surface of the earth seemed unmoved, skies grey and unmoving, winds light but cold, nothing obvious, nothing loud. But below that surface, everything was preparing. Life did not die. It receded. It curled inward, into seeds, into spores, into the mud beneath the cold. Forests shrank into sheltered valleys. Birdsong quieted. Insects buried themselves deeper. Even the microbes, those smallest of architects, slowed their breath to match the earth's. waiting for the warmth that would eventually return. This is not extinction. It is sleep. The kind of sleep that knows how to outlast ice, how to wait in stone and dust and dark water. The kind of sleep that listens, and above it all, the planet spun. Not faster, not slower, but steady, holding its silence, holding its course, between what was and what would come. We see it in the fossil record, long gaps with few new forms, few new footprints, few new bones. But the gaps aren't empty. They are pregnant with potential, because when the world is still, it is not pausing, it is preparing. Even in glacial silence, the carbon cycles continued. Tectonic plates shifted. Ocean salinity changed, molecule by molecule. Genes drifted, reshaped by tiny, quiet mutations. Evolution does not always move in leaps. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it builds its momentum beneath the ice. We call these lulls stasis, but nothing in Earth is ever truly static. It is simply subtle, and that subtlety matters because when the silence ends, when the next warmth arrives, when the glaciers begin to melt, what follows is not chaos, but unfolding, a reawakening of what slept, a rising of spores into ferns, a flowering of life that never stopped preparing. The silence between epochs is not a void, it is the threshold, and we in this moment may be standing in such a threshold now. There are signs, unsettling ones, yes, but signs nonetheless. Rising seas, warming air, species shifting range, weather turning strange. We may think the world is unraveling, but perhaps it is turning, from one breath to the next, from one epoch to another, and in that turn there is tension and promise. We do not always hear the breath until after it's drawn. We do not always see the change until it's past, but the earth feels it, in its mantle, in its ice, in its forests and fields and falling rain. The silence we walk through now may not be stillness at all, but the deep inhale before a new story begins, and maybe the next breath has already begun. But if we wish to read that breath, to understand it, to follow it back through time, we must look not at the vast but at the invisible dust. It's always been there, drifting quietly across the planet's skin, lifted by wind, shaped by drought, falling where no one is watching. We do not often see it, but ice does. Layer by layer, snow settles onto glaciers, each flake soft, delicate, and yet in time, weight-bearing, and hidden in that snow, year after year, is tiny particles carried by wind from deserts, now buried, from mountains now crumbled, from fires long extinguished. Some grains are so small they circle the globe before they fall. Some come from volcanoes, some from meteors, some from the footsteps of animals whose names we've never known. In these grains, no wider than a hair, are entire histories. The ash of ancient forests, the pollen of lost plants, the carbon of prehistoric fire. Dust, it turns out, is not lifeless. It is memory, unbound. When scientists drill deep into glacial cores, they read the ice like scripture, each layer a chapter, each speck of dust a word. Iron-rich dust from the Sahara tells of dry years, when monsoons failed and sand took flight. Ash from Siberia speaks of boreal fires, when the forests burned under skies no longer cool. Traces of lead, tin, copper, whispers of metallurgy from early civilizations, echoing into the quiet white. Even footsteps leave dust. The movement of herds, the march of armies, the planting of fields, all disturb the surface, sending particles skyward, where they rise, travel, and eventually settle. The ice remembers them all. To the naked eye, it's nothing. A faint haze in a block of blue, but beneath microscopes, that haze becomes a constellation, every dot a clue, every shape a signature. Some particles are sharp-edged, fresh, recently born from rock. Others are smoothed by travel, rounded, ancient, polished by wind and sky. We can date them. We can trace their origins. We can feel their silence. Because dust doesn't shout. It whispers. It falls without sound. It collects in corners. It waits in frozen chambers, where the wind cannot reach and time cannot erase. And in those chambers, it speaks, not in voice, but in presence. A shift in mineral content tells of continental drift. A surge in soot marks the rise of industry. A layer of cosmic dust hints at distant impact. Dust is how the earth writes its smallest truths, not bold, not loud, but persistent. And in that persistence there is something sacred, because long after we are gone, long after cities have crumbled and oceans have risen, the dust will still fall. It will drift through the air. It will find its way to ice, to sediment, to stone, and it will carry with it the story of what once was. Not the headlines, not the monuments, but the breath of forests, the trace of fire, the faint, forgotten fingerprint of living things. Perhaps it's fitting that something so small holds so much, because the earth too is subtle. Its memory doesn't always need volume, it needs time and patience, and somewhere deep beneath our feet, in ancient ice still untouched, dust from this very moment is falling. It will rest there, pressed between layers of snow, waiting, and one day it may be red, under glass, in the careful hands of someone else, someone far beyond now, who will wonder what kind of world this dust once belonged to. And still, it falls like a soft voice in frozen chambers. But not all voices are carried forward, not all are remembered. Some fossils lie deeper, quieter, so far beyond our stories that even time forgets to speak their names. These are not the famous ones, not the teeth of tyrants or the bones of beasts that walk through textbooks. These are the ones time slipped past, too small, too strange, too soon. They rest in the shadowed layers of stone, sealed in sediment, not as icons but as relics of another rhythm, species with no living relatives, branches of the tree of life that bloomed briefly, then vanished without a trace, except for the silent imprint of their passing. We do not know what colours they were, what sounds they made, what instincts drove them. The rock does not say. It gives us shape, sometimes a texture, rarely a context, and so they remain fossils of the forgotten, not mourned, not marvelled, just endured. But endurance is its own kind of truth, to last beyond memory, to remain when everything else has crumbled, to exist without being known. That is a kind of grace. We find them sometimes tucked between the more celebrated layers, pressed into shale or curled inside nodules, a trilobite we've never catalogued, a fern with no known seed, a jawbone too peculiar to place. And when we do, there's a pause, a moment when the narrative slips, because what do we do with a life that fits nowhere? Science wants order, timelines, connections, but these fossils offer only interruption, a reminder that the story is bigger than what we've mapped. There were worlds before ours, and within those worlds, lives that came and went without audience. And perhaps that's the lesson, that value is not invisibility, that significance does not require legacy. These beings once moved, breathed, ate, slept, died, without knowing whether anything would follow them, and something did. Not their children, but the earth itself. They became part of the crust, the soil, the calcium in a bird's egg. 10 million years later, endurance beyond recognition. And maybe they still hold questions we haven't learned to ask, questions about forms we've never imagined, ecosystems too alien to reconstruct, functions that leave no trace. Because what if not everything fossilizes? What if memory itself has holes? In those gaps, these forgotten creatures drift, not in rebellion, not in grief, but in quiet completion. They were, that is enough. And in some way they still are, not as presence, but as absence. We can feel when we look at a fossil we cannot name. It's a different kind of echo, one that doesn't bounce back, but invites us forward to wonder, to listen deeper, to accept that the story of life is not only what's remembered, but also what's slipped past the telling, and maybe they still hold questions no one thought to ask, because some answers rise from deeper places, not from the cold, but from the heat buried beneath it, beneath the ice, beneath the frozen archives of memory. The earth still burns, not loudly, not always visibly, but steadily. It is easy to imagine a world locked in glaciation as deadened, silent, sealed, a frozen sphere where all energy sleeps, but that is only the surface. Far below the kilometers of compacted snow, beneath the ancient dust and dormant fossils, the mantle breathes, magma moves, not in rage, but in rhythm. Convection currents turn like dreams beneath the crust, carrying heat from the core toward the waiting stone. Even the coldest places rest upon fire. Iceland, clothed in glaciers, straddles a volcanic seam. Antarctica, crowned in whiteness, hides lava lakes and buried volcanoes beneath its ice sheet. The Yellowstone caldera sleeps under snow, but its breath fogs the air in geysers and hot springs. These are not exceptions. They are reminders that cold is never complete, that fire never forgets. Supervolcanoes, some the size of mountain ranges, grumble quietly beneath the crust. Their chambers fill, collapse, refill again over spans of time longer than empires, longer than language. They wait, not passively but with purpose, because the earth is not made of stillness, it is made of cycles. And fire is one of its oldest rhythms. Even under glacial miles, that rhythm continues. Heat pulses upward. It melts the base of ice sheets, lubricating the motion of glaciers. It forms subglacial lakes, hidden, pressurized, alive with microscopic life. This heat does not rise in flames. It rises in patience, a soft warming, a long promise, and it changes things. The melting at the base of glaciers affects how ice flows, where it moves, how it fractures, how it remembers. Sometimes heat from below causes sudden releases. Yokel harps, glacial outburst floods, ancient, sleeping water freed by the fire's slow reach. We often think of glaciers as indifferent to what lies beneath, but they are shaped by it, just as stone is shaped by wind, just as memory is shaped by time. And so beneath all that ice, the warmth remains, shifting, pressing, becoming. The earth's core still turns, its mantle still flows, the crust still cracks, and maybe the surface feels it. Maybe the retreat of the glaciers is not only about the warming air above, but about the fire below, writing its return in slow, inevitable script. Because fire doesn't vanish, it changes form, it waits, and when it rises, it does so not just to destroy, but to renew, to bring minerals to the surface, to build new land, to remind the cold that nothing is forever, not even silence, not even sleep. So perhaps while the ice held its breath, the fire beneath wrote poems in pressure, etched songs into magma chambers, carried warmth through stone like a message waiting to be read. And now, as the glaciers thin, as the permafrost yields, as the old ice breaks and melts into story, that message is surfacing, not in ash, but in shift, not in catastrophe, but in transformation, a new breath, a new cycle, a reminder that beneath all endings there is heat, there is motion, there is origin, and maybe warmth has been writing its return all along, because where warmth moves, life listens. And when ice begins to lift, even slightly, even slowly, something ancient stirs, not in forests, not in herds, but in the smallest places, in the spaces between melt and shadow, in the microscopic algae, resilient, patient. For eons they've waited, sealed in glacial crevices, tucked inside permafrost, frozen in the still water of subglacial lakes, dormant, but never dead. And now, as the thaw begins to spread across the margins of the ice, they bloom, green, unexpected, soft as breath against the white. They do not trumpet their return. They do not rise in conquest. They appear a stain on snowfields, a faint haze on melt ponds, a shimmer just below the surface of clear, cold water, colour blooming where colour was long denied. To the casual eye it might seem unremarkable, a smear of green on a melting slope, but within that smear lies history, a lineage stretching back billions of years, to when the earth was young and sunlight first met chlorophyll. These algae, reborn from ancient spores, are descendants of that first conversation between light and life, the ones who turned photons into breath. They are Earth's quiet chemists. They take in carbon, release oxygen, form the base of food chains, change the world molecule by molecule, and now they have returned, not from migration, but from memory. We find them in Antarctica, blooming in shallow meltwater pools, in Greenland, painting glaciers with reddish-green streaks, even on high alpine snowpacks where temperature swings wildly. They persist, and they do more than colour the landscape. They reshape it. Their pigments darken the snow, reducing its reflectivity. More heat is absorbed. Melting accelerates. So the algae bloom more. A loop, a feedback, a dialogue between biology and climate. It is not always gentle, but it is always alive. Scientists call it the greening of ice, a new phase, a quiet revolution, and within that revolution lies a truth, that life does not disappear. It waits. It endures beneath kilometers of pressure. It suspends itself in spore form, tiny capsules of possibility, and when conditions shift, when light returns, when warmth creeps back, it unfolds again, not as something new, but as something remembered, a rhythm resumed, a breath continued, a colour reawakened. There is beauty in this, not just because it is delicate, but because it is certain. Algae do not wonder if the world is ready. They bloom, they reclaim their place in the cycle. In a world where so much is lost, they are a reminder that not everything fades, that some life is seeded too deeply to forget itself. They mark the thresholds between ice and water, between stillness and movement, between silence and song. The first green, not in spring but in thaw. And maybe we should take note, because these smallest lives may be the first to tell us what kind of world we are entering. Their bloom is both memory and signal, a marker of what was and what is becoming. And as they spread quietly, gently, across the melting surface, they remind us of something elemental, that life has always waited for the thaw, but while life waits, time does not even in silence, not even in ice, because even stillness is never truly still. In the deepest cold, where breath crystallizes and glaciers press against bedrock, something moves, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. Entropy. Not chaos, but drift. Not disorder, but change. We often think of ice as the ultimate pause, a way to suspend time, to preserve, to freeze the world in place. And to the eye, it seems true. Ice sits where it has sat for millennia. Crystals remain locked in shape. Temperatures fall far below the threshold for motion. But beneath that illusion, everything is shifting. Molecules within the ice do not stop moving. They vibrate, adjust, shuffle their bonds. Tiny defects form. Cracks propagate. Air bubbles stretch under pressure, rearranging themselves grain by grain. The structure of ice is not fixed. It's fluid in a language too slow for us to hear. Even the most perfect crystal breaks down. Gradually, edges blur, order erodes. The very precision of its symmetry begins to give way. This is entropy, not as destruction, but as inevitability. A glacier may seem eternal, but it is always unmaking itself, not in collapse, but in persistence. Weight changes it, heat softens it, time unwinds its careful lattice, and it is not just the ice that succumbs. Stone thought to be beyond time fractures under the slow insistence of frost. Water seeps into its pores, freezes, expands, and breaks it open, again and again, season after season, century after century. Even silence grinds mountains to dust. We see it now in melting ice sheets, not just their retreat but their rearrangement. Crevasses widen, layers slip, old air escapes. Glacial faces carve, not just from heat above, but from the internal tension below. Entropy is not sudden, it is patient, it is everywhere, and perhaps that is its power, because even in a world of cold where time feels paused and history sleeps, the drift continues, not in rebellion, but in rhythm. We find its trace in isotopic imbalance, in crystals, slightly misaligned, in water that no longer freezes quite the same, even in permafrost, frozen for tens of thousands of years. The slow leak begins, methane seeps, cells rupture, compounds split. Entropy does not ask permission, it simply unfolds, but this unfolding is not the end. It is the next step, because in every dissolving edge, a new pattern can begin. In every collapse there is space for renewal. So perhaps the ice knows this. Perhaps it too is learning to let go, to shift from solidity into story, from archive into transformation. The glacier that melts does not vanish. It becomes river, it becomes lake, it becomes vapor, rising again toward cloud. Even decay has its destination. And in that drift there is beauty, because entropy is not the loss of order, it is the movement of time through matter, the soft exhale of the universe as it rearranges itself. And we, carved by the same laws, are not separate from it. Our bodies shift, our memories blur, our words erode, but within all of it, within the quiet melt of ice, the fracture of stone, the slow curling of leaf to dust, there is continuity, a flow, a grace. So the next time we stand before a glacier, listening to the creaks and groans of its restless sleep, we might wonder, is it dissolving or is it becoming something new? Is this the end of stillness or the beginning of motion we cannot yet measure? Maybe even ice is learning to dissolve, and in that dissolution there is something almost sacred. Glaciers do not vanish in a single breath. They do not explode. They do not scream. They collapse, gradually, elegantly, like something too heavy to hold its own shape any longer. From a distance they still seem whole, mountains of frozen time, unchanging, immovable. But up close the silence tells another story. Crevices stretch wider, edges bow inward, walls slough off in chunks, white cliffs crumbling into meltwater below. A calving face falls into the sea, not all at once but in great slow motion fragments. What breaks is not just ice, it is memory, it is mass, it is myth. Because for centuries we imagined glaciers as eternal, as the fixed background to human history. Unmoved and unmoving, we built stories on their backs, drew borders by their edges, measured time by their retreat. But now they are disappearing faster than any story can hold. And in that disappearance we see ourselves. The slow collapse of silence is also the soft unmaking of certainty, a reminder that even what seems most solid can be undone, not in anger, but in ache. These glaciers are not just ice, they are archives, layers of atmosphere, volcanic dust, the breath of mammoths, the rainfall of forgotten epochs. As they melt, those records are released, not preserved in stone but lost in vapor. A sentence erased mid-verse, a library soaked in water, and yet the collapse is not without grace. It is not reckless. It is not loud. It is the sound of surrender. the sound of a form reaching its end and letting go without resistance. In that letting go, there is reflection. We see what happens when systems absorb more than they can hold. Heat, weight, pressure, time. We see how beauty can endure, even as it unravels, and we are reminded that endurance is not always survival. Sometimes it is the long, aching act of release. To watch a glacier collapse is to witness time returning to water, to feel the weight of centuries soften into flow, and perhaps that softening is necessary, not just for rivers and sea levels and climate charts, but for us to remember that stillness is not forever, that silence is not stability, that holding on too tightly can lead to fracture. So we stand at the edge. We watch the cliffs fall. We hear the distant groan, low as thunder beneath the waves, and we wonder, what are we watching? An ending, a beginning, or simply the turning of another page? Because the glacier does not resist, it yields, and in its yielding, it reflects us, not as we are, but as we could be, able to let go, able to return, able to change form without losing meaning. There is something deeply human in the way ice collapses, not in destruction but in slow acceptance, a kind of grieving that holds beauty in every crack. We do not need to fear the sound, we need only to listen, and in listening perhaps we will find a new rhythm, one that honors what stood but moves forward with grace, because glaciers do not fall in rage. They fall like breath leaving the lungs, like thought passing into dream, like memory releasing itself into water, and maybe we are still reflected in their surrender. But not all reflections are clear. Some ripple, some fade before we can name them, and in the layers of ice and stone, some lives pass through without leaving bones. There are ghosts in the fossil record, soft-bodied creatures that left no skeletons, no teeth, no armor to preserve, only shadows, traces pressed into ancient silt, hardened into memory, without form, a ripple in shale, a faint discoloration in clay, an outline so delicate it could be mistaken for a breath. We find them sometimes, accidentally, a smudge where a shape once rested, a filament finer than a strand of hair, an impression with no matching species, no context, no clear ancestor, no known end, just a pale echo of motion, a suggestion of something that once lived, moved, fed, dreamed, and then vanished. These are the forgotten creatures, not because they were small or weak or failed, but because they didn't fossilize. The earth remembers in stone, but only what it can hold, only what resists decay, only what survives the crush of time. And so, an entire world may have passed unseen, a bloom of soft-bodied beings, jelly-like, boneless, slipping through epochs without a trace. And when the glaciers came, they pressed even harder. Those creatures who lived along the fringes, in wetlands, in bogs, in shallow estuaries, were erased not by death but by compression. The ice bore down, and what was once life became layering, silence, We see the gaps in our maps, blank stretches in the fossil timeline, unfilled pages in the book of Earth. But perhaps those pages were written in ink too soft to keep. Still, we search. Still, we listen, because sometimes shadows speak. In Burgess Shale, in Changjiang, we found the rare exceptions, soft bodies preserved by miracle, eyes, gills, tendrils, and tissues, and with them came a new story that life has always been stranger than we assumed, more complex, more varied, that what we know is only what we could hold. The rest, the squirming, pulsing, luminous rest, slipped by in silence, and beneath the ice, beneath the grinding sheets that once covered continents, there may still be more, trapped in frozen mud, sealed in permafrost pockets, locked in the anoxic depths of subglacial lakes, not fossilized, but waiting. Some species sleep long. Algae, bacteria, spores. But others may never return. They left only their outlines, their negative space, their afterimage, and we chase them still, through the gaps, through the strange, through the quiet. We dream of what might have been, what colour they were, what patterns they followed in migration, what names they never received. And in doing so, we acknowledge the truth that history is incomplete, that memory is biased toward bone. But life is more than structure. It is gesture. It is softness. It is presence that cannot be pinned to a chart. And so we watch the edges of the fossil record with reverence, because something passed there. And even in absence, its echo changes the story. We begin to see what was missing, not as error, but as invitation. An invitation to imagine, to feel what the stone cannot show, to sense the movement of beings who did not ask to be remembered, but left their shape just long enough for us to wonder. And still, we wonder who else slept beneath the ice. Now the ice begins to soften. It seeps, it loosens, it melts, not suddenly, not all at once, but with the long sigh of something letting go. And from that letting go, water begins to move again. Glacial meltwater, clear as glass, cold as memory, drips from crevasses, pulls in hollows, then gathers itself into motion. At first it whispers, a trickle between stones, a thread of sound in a silent world. But then it grows, it braids and branches, it flows over what the glacier once buried, and in its flowing it begins to remember, because water is not just change, it is memory set loose. Every drop carries a past, oxygen isotopes from colder times, minerals scraped from bedrock beneath ancient weight, dust that once fell from extinct skies, and now all of it begins to move. New rivers wake from old beds, pathways, long forgotten, now found again by meltwater's gentle insistence. They do not rush to the sea. They wander. They trace the shapes of vanished valleys. They follow the lines that glaciers left behind, the grooves, the scars, the softened bones of the land. In some places, the rivers carve anew. In others, they remember, and as they move, they bring life with them. Algae blooms where ice once ruled, moss gathers on damp stone, insects follow, birds return, the land exhales. Not with sound, but with greenness. The thaw, it seems, is not an end. It's a reawakening. Even the soil, long compacted beneath the glacier's weight, begins to rise, to breathe. This is not rebirth, it is continuity. A story paused, now flowing forward again, and the rivers tell it. We hear them as background, as stream, as runoff, as melt, but they are more than that. They are the planet's whisper, finding voice in motion. The movement of meltwater is the language of release. It speaks not in words, but in patterns, in curves, in sediment carried, in minerals revealed, and through it, the earth communicates, not just to us, but to itself, to the forest downstream, to the lakes forming in glacial hollows, to the ocean swelling with memory. We've begun to map these changes, to trace the new rivers, measure their flow, calculate their chemistry, but we forget sometimes to listen, because what we're hearing isn't just the sound of melting, it's the return of something older, a rhythm beneath the ice now resurfacing. Water that once froze in a different age now runs again, touching stone not seen in 50,000 years. It does not hurry, it remembers, and in that remembering it reshapes. The rivers carve valleys into stories. They flood and retreat, they dig and deposit, they turn sediment into chapters, and each new turn is a continuation of what began long before we arrived. The planet, it seems, has not forgotten how to speak. It simply needed to melt before it could be heard again. And so we listen. As the meltwater flows, we follow its shimmer across the land, its voice through the forest, its story into the sea, and we understand this is not loss. It is release, not forgetting, but remembering in motion, not silence undone, but silence transformed, because even in surrender, the glacier leaves behind a song, and maybe the planet has begun to whisper in liquid again. But not all whispers rise to the surface. Some remain below, suspended in cold and darkness, blooming in silence, beneath Antarctica's thick shelves of ice, where sunlight never reaches and pressure bends metal like breath. There is another world, not frozen, not empty, but softly glowing. At the bottom of the planet, in the darkness under miles of snow and sea, life endures, not by warmth from above, but from the fire below. Geothermal vents push up through cracks in the crust, releasing heat and minerals into the abyss, and around these invisible oases, life gathers, not in fields, but in filaments, in strange, soft colonies, in creatures that have never seen the sky. There are no forests here, no leaves, no roots, but there is light. Tiny pulses, flashes, rhythms of blue and green and violet, bioluminescence, light without flame, without sun, generated in the bodies of deep-dwelling beings who communicate in glimmers. Here the darkness is not void, it is habitat, it is home, and life has adapted to it. Not as challenge, but as invitation. Giant isopods crawl like armored thoughts. Ghost octopuses drift with translucent grace. Tube worms thrive without eyes, feeding on sulfur, rooted to vents like flowers made of heat. Even bacteria here shimmer, tiny signals in the water, turning chemical reaction into glow. This is not a rare corner. It is a thriving system, hidden beneath the very continent we call frozen. And the more we look, the more we find. Subglacial lakes, long sealed from the surface, harbour microbial life that survived isolation for hundreds of thousands of years, in total darkness, in pressure so high it would flatten bone, in waters rich with salt and minerals, but devoid of light. And yet they live, not because of what the sun gives, but because of what the earth offers from within. This is life, not dependent on sky, but on the deep. And it tells a different story, one where survival doesn't chase warmth from above, but creates its own from below. Perhaps the deep sea remembers what the sky forgot. That light is not only a gift from the stars, but something life can create on its own. A slow, pulsing language of persistence, of motion in silence, of beauty in isolation. Even here, where no eye was meant to see, colour persists, not in spectrum but in glow, not in brightness but in presence. We've only glimpsed this world, a few remotely operated vehicles, a handful of expeditions, tiny windows into a vast unseen realm. But what they show us is astonishing, that even beneath the thickest ice where time feels still and life seems impossible, something blooms, something ancient, something new, something radiant in ways we're only beginning to understand. It is not loud, it is not large, but it is real, and perhaps it is where the memory of warmth first begins again, because light in the deep is not the echo of the sun, it is the whisper of life itself, the promise, a flicker, a signal that even here in the farthest reaches of frost and shadow, Earth is still dreaming, still glowing, still alive. And maybe the deep sea remembers what the sky forgot. But memory isn't held only in water or light. Sometimes it waits beneath our feet, in silence so deep it takes centuries to exhale. This is permafrost, frozen ground, locked in a trance for tens of thousands of years. Soil, ice, root and bone, fused in cold stillness. It stretches across the north, in Siberia, in Alaska, in the Canadian tundra, in vast hidden patches beneath the Arctic Ocean floor. We once believed it was inert, frozen, fixed, a boundary between life and long memory. But permafrost is not a wall, it is a threshold, and now it's beginning to speak, not in words, but in breath, in vapor, in gas. It sighs, it leaks, it releases. As the planet warms, the permafrost softens, and what was once sealed begins to stir. Inside it, organic matter, buried long ago, never fully decomposed because cold paused the process. Now the pause is ending, and decay resumes. Fungi wake, bacteria feed, carbon is released, methane rises, invisible but potent, a greenhouse gas more powerful than carbon dioxide, accumulating not from factories but from Earth's own forgotten breath. The frozen ground is exhaling, and we are beginning to hear it. Cracks split the tundra, lakes bubble with methane. In some places, the soil collapses into itself, giant sinkholes, craters where once there was only frost. We call them thermokarst, a beautiful word for a quiet unraveling. And within those craters, stories emerge, carcasses, seeds, pollen, spores, even viruses, frozen for millennia, now released into the present. The past doesn't just return through records, it returns through chemistry. The language of permafrost is molecular, carbon signatures, nitrogen ratios, isotope fingerprints. We learn to listen through sensors and samples, through gas flares and soil cores, through heat maps that glow red in places that once pulsed blue. And still the Earth speaks, not in panic, not in anger, but in consequence, because permafrost is not passive. It responds to climate, to time, to change. What was buried rises, not just gas, but memory and meaning. We are just beginning to understand what this means. How many gigatons of carbon lie waiting? How quickly can the thaw accelerate? What tipping points hide within the frost? These are not just scientific questions, they are questions of story, of language. Because when the ground begins to speak, we must decide how to listen. Do we treat it as warning, as prophecy, as a lesson told too late? Or do we hear in it a second chance, a voice long ignored, now rising through cracks in the silence? Earth does not speak in urgency. It speaks in duration, the slow exhale of forgotten breath, the scent of carbon older than memory, the hiss of methane through thawed veins, a grammar written in gas, a syntax of shifting soil, a vocabulary of collapse. And yet, even here there is wonder, to know that the planet keeps its archives not only in stone and ice, but in the living ground, to realize that beneath every step there may be a story waiting to rise. Not all stories comfort, some disturb, some warn, some ache with truth, but all deserve to be heard. And so we lean closer, we place microphones in the soil, we measure the breath of the earth with care, with humility, with awe, because permafrost may not be permanent, but its language is ancient, and still Earth speaks in languages older than sound. But not all of its languages are spoken, some are shaped. When a glacier retreats, it does not vanish without a trace. It leaves behind a memory, not written in words but carved into the skin of the planet. These are the ghost structures, the architecture of absence. Valleys shaped like softened spires, hollows where the ice once pressed down like breath, long ridges of rock and soil, moraines pushed forward, then abandoned like forgotten scaffolding. We walk these places now, unaware that we are moving through ruins, not ruins of cities, but of ice. Glaciers do not build in stone, they build by pressure, by motion, by time. They sculpt the land beneath them, grinding rock into flour, smoothing ridges into waves. They dig basins that will one day become lakes. They split mountains. They deposit erratic boulders from far away, placed like punctuation in unfamiliar fields. Everything they touch is shaped. Even after the glacier is gone, its fingerprint remains. A U-shaped valley is the signature of glacial hands. A kettle lake is a collapsed remnant of buried ice. Striations on bedrock are the etchings of movement too slow to see. These features do not fade quickly. They last for ages, long after the cold has lifted, long after the ice has melted. They are the bones of vanished bodies, ghost bones, structural echoes, and just like bones, they tell stories. Geologists read them like blueprints, mapping where the glacier once flowed, how fast, how wide, how long it stood still. They reconstruct ancient landscapes from the architecture left behind. But these aren't just scientific remnants, they are emotional ones too, because there is grief in the shape of a vanished thing. There is quiet beauty in a landscape that once held weight and now holds only memory. We do not often think of land as loss, but glacial terrain teaches us that it can be. A valley without its glacier is a cathedral without its roof. A moraine is a crumbled wall. A cirque is an amphitheatre, emptied of its voice, and yet there is also grace in what remains. The land does not mourn alone. It transforms. Lakes form in the hollows. Forests grow where ice once lay heavy. Meadows rise in the rubble of retreat. Even in absence, the glacier continues to shape the world. Perhaps this is the deeper nature of architecture. To endure beyond the builder, to continue influencing form long after the hand is gone. And maybe this architecture is not finished, because ice may return, cycles turn, climates shift. What is ghost now may one day be structure again, or perhaps the new architects are rivers, or roots, or winds, all of them building on what the glacier left behind. A continuation, not of ice, but of shape, a memory passed not through word or thought, but through contour. And when we walk these glacial landscapes, feel the hush of a broad valley, the stillness of a stone-strewn slope, we are not walking through emptiness, we are walking through design, an invisible architecture built by something that no longer breathes, but once held the world in its grasp, and even now its form remains, not to haunt, but to remind that the past doesn't disappear. It settles, it reshapes. It lingers in the line of a hill, in the curve of a basin, in the silence of a field that once held ice. And maybe that architecture is not finished, because not all structures left behind by ice belong to glaciers. Some, they say, were built by hands, human or not, known or never remembered. Stories flicker across time, like cold embers, whispers of cities buried beneath the frost, civilizations swallowed by the advancing cold, sealed in silence. We find them not in textbooks, but in the spaces between, in oral traditions passed along firesides, in fragments of forgotten languages, in sonar shadows beneath polar shelves. There are tales from the Siberian north, of ruins found in frozen soil, walls too even, angles too exact, objects of worked stone with no known maker, and beneath the polar seas long ridges and hexagonal patterns trace the ocean floor. Are they geological quirks, or blueprints weathered by the tides of forgetting? We do not know, and perhaps that is what gives them weight. Whether they are myth or memory, their silence is heavy, because if they were real, if cities once rose where now only ice breathes, what does that say about time, about cycles, about what we lose when the earth turns away from warmth? Perhaps they were not cities as we know them. Perhaps they were settlements, or vessels, or dreams made stone. Perhaps they were never built at all, but imagined into the cold by those who sensed something deeper, something resting beneath the surface. We often mistake silence for emptiness, but beneath the ice, silence has mass. It pushes down, it protects, it preserves, and maybe it conceals. There are frozen lakes whose bottoms have never been touched, caverns that have not felt light since before language. Is it so strange to wonder if something still lingers there, not alive, not gone, but suspended in crystalline time, just as spores can wait for millennia, just as algae can bloom after eons? What else might endure in stasis? A culture halted mid-thought, a technology too slow to decay, a memory not fossilized but dreaming. Some believe these are ruins, fragments of a forgotten humanity. Others call them waiting rooms, portals to epochs not yet ready to return. In the end, both are metaphors. Metaphors for what lies beneath our own understanding, because whether or not cities sleep in the ice, the idea of them changes us. It opens a door to the possibility that we are not the first to rise, to build, to vanish, that civilization may not be a single line, but a pattern, a spiral, an echoing breath. Glacial pulses do not just shape land, they erase maps, they reset the world in long intervals, and in between, who's to say what rose, what stood, what froze before it could speak? We find occasional anomalies, tools in ancient strata, mineral composites where none should be, traces of heat in places untouched by modern fire. Science passes them cautiously. Myth steps in to fill the silence. But perhaps the truth is not in either extreme. Perhaps it lies in the middle, in the space between the known and the hoped. We do not need proof to be curious. We do not need certainty to wonder. And maybe that wonder is what these cities were meant to evoke. Not monuments to power, but questions. Messages left for a species not yet arrived. A pattern in stone. A chamber beneath the sea. A hum in the permafrost, too slow for the ear to catch. And as the ice recedes, we may yet uncover more. Not ruins, but riddles. Not answers, but the next layer of the dream. Because if the earth forgets slowly, it also reveals with patience. And maybe they still sleep, dreaming in crystalline time. But above them, we are wide awake, burning, building, breathing faster than the planet can answer. For thousands of years, ice moved in rhythms older than our species. It advanced and receded with the tilt of the earth, with the breath of volcanoes, with the silent turning of oceans deep. But now, it moves differently, not from within but from us, from the carbon in our breath, from the warmth of our cities, from the long smoke trailing upward from fire and machine. Glacial time does not speak in hours or years. It speaks in ages. But we, with our hunger, our speed, have begun to rewrite that language. The atmosphere, once shaped by forests and long decay, now pulses with what we've exhaled in just a few lifetimes. Greenhouse gases have stacked up in the sky like a second atmosphere, invisible but heavy, and the ice feels it. It thins, it carves, it melts from below, it responds, not with words, but with silence, giving way to water. We melt what took millennia to build, what formed under pressure so slow, so careful, that it cannot catch up to our questions. And still, we ask more. We drill, we tunnel, we fly over the last white spaces, measuring, mapping, modeling their decline. We try to understand what we've changed, but we often forget to feel it, to feel the scale, the sorrow, the deep unspoken cost, because every breath we take joins the long conversation of the planet, not just with carbon, but with consequence. Our footsteps have weight, our breath leaves traces. We are not just passers-by, we are part of the archive. Even we, in all our urgency, are becoming sediment, satellite images, plastic layers in the ocean floor, a spike in carbon from every coal fire and combustion engine. These are the signatures of our presence. We are leaving behind a strange, fast fossil record, technofossils, radioisotopes, glass and ash and microbeads. A new layer is forming beneath our feet, thin and sudden, written not in stone but in the language of speed. And the earth, patient as ever, is writing us down, not with judgment, but with attention. It does not resist us, but it remembers. It catalogues our impact in the snowpack, in the acidity of rain, in the warmth that reaches deeper each year. It presses us into the record, just as it once pressed ferns into coal and shells into cliffs. We are not separate. We are not above. We are part of the layers now. And someday, long after our cities have turned to dust, someone or something may read us there. in the spike of carbon-13, in the band of soot, in the remnants of metal, in the shape of what we could not take back, but also in the warmth we gave, in the questions we asked, in the effort, however late, to change, because even fossils speak of transformation, of what once lived, then endured through time's long fire. We are not the first to change the planet, but we may be the first to know we're doing it. And in that knowing there is possibility, the possibility to listen, to respond, to slow down and match the rhythm of something older than ourselves, to take one breath that doesn't push the ice further toward the sea, one moment to stand still long enough to hear the glacier creak, not in collapse but in conversation, because even now, even here there is time, not to return, but to reimagine. And maybe Earth has already begun to write us down, but the record is still wet with possibility, because even as we watch the glaciers retreat, the ice dissolve, the permafrost breathe, we must remember something deeper. The thaw was always coming. This is not failure. This is not betrayal. This is the arc of ice, its slow promise, its quiet vow. From the moment a flake falls and settles, becomes snow, becomes fern, becomes glacier, melting is already part of its story. All ice is temporary. It stays for centuries, holds pressure, carves mountains, seals away breath and memory. But it was never meant to last forever. Even the coldest places warm eventually. Even the thickest walls soften in the sun. This is not ruin, this is return. Because ice, too, is a form of holding, of waiting, of pause. And the thaw is the moment when that waiting ends, when motion begins again, when the water, long locked, finds its way forward. It's easy to grieve what's melting, to see it only as loss. And yes, some things do vanish. Some species, some balance, some shapes we've come to love. But the planet does not end with melt. It changes. It moves. It breathes anew. The question is not whether the thaw will come, it is who will be listening when it does. Because meltwater does not just carry temperature, it carries stories, sediment, seeds, answers left unsaid beneath the ice. It pours into rivers once dry. It rewrites coastlines. It awakens microbes long sealed away. It opens channels in stone, softens soil, and makes the old new again. This is the work of transformation. Glaciers do not collapse into silence. They collapse into memory made liquid, and with each melt, we are offered a moment to witness, to respond. The water that spills from beneath the ice knows more than we do. It has touched landscapes unseen. It has tasted layers untouched for thousands of years. It carries with it the minerals of deep time, the chemistry of pause, the voice of slowness. It doesn't rush. It remembers, and in its remembering, it reshapes the world. Lakes form where there were once hollows. Wetlands return to nourish migrations. Valleys regreen. And even in cities far from the poles, the thaw makes itself known in rising seas, in shifting rains, in the subtle rearrangement of what we thought was fixed. This is not only a global shift, it is a personal one, because as the ice transforms, so must we. Not by clinging tighter, but by softening too, by learning the difference between collapse and release, between breaking and becoming. The thaw is a mirror. It shows us what we hold too tightly, what we've tried to freeze in place. Ideas, economies, memories of stability, but nothing in nature stays unmoved. Even the mountains breathe. In millimeters, even the ice lets go. So we must ask, what will the meltwater carry with it? Will it carry only the weight of what we've lost? Or will it carry the seeds of something new? The answer is not yet written. It flows, it gathers, it waits to be shaped by us, by time, by the thaw that was always coming. And still, what will the meltwater carry with it? Now the ice begins to pull back like a curtain, and the world stirs beneath it, not suddenly, not loudly, but with the long, aching breath of something ancient waking after a deep sleep. This is not the end of ice, nor the full return of warmth, but something between, a planet in the pause between dreams. We watch as the last great shelves fracture, as the polar edges glow with unfamiliar warmth, as glaciers become rivers, and snowmelt feeds forests that once lay buried, and beneath it all, the earth stretches. Not with force, but with memory. Tectonic plates shift gently, continents moving as they always have, rearranging themselves beneath our feet, writing new coastlines in soft drafts. The crust remembers the weight it once held. The land rebounds from centuries of pressure. Valleys rise, bays deepen. The planet adjusts, not with complaint, but with the quiet grace of change. What slept begins to wake, not just the algae and microbes, but stories. Fossils long frozen come into light. Ancient air escapes from melting cores. Forgotten seeds stir in warming soil, and we, the newcomers, the breathers of carbon and keepers of flame, stand at the edge of something both old and never seen before. It is not a return to what was. It cannot be. Too much has shifted. Too much has dissolved, evolved, moved on. But this is not a loss. This is a becoming a planet shaped by sleep, by freeze and thaw, by silence and sound, by all that endured beneath the ice, and all that did not. We carry both, the memory and the forgetting, the warmth and the chill, in our bones, in our tools, in our questions, because to live on a planet that once slept beneath ice is to be shaped by both its dreams and its awakenings. We inherit the scars of glaciers, the valleys, the moraines, the slow wisdom etched into stone, but we also inherit the responsibility of movement, of what comes next. The earth is not finished, and neither are we. What we become now will echo into the layers beneath our feet, into the fossils we leave behind, into the climate we shape or unshape. We are not passengers, we are punctuation. We are the inflection point in the story the planet is still writing. And maybe, just maybe, it is dreaming us forward, not into ruin, but into meaning, into a future not yet imagined, but already whispered in the movement of water, in the return of colour to thawed land, in the sigh of permafrost, in the soft green glow beneath the ice. This planet, this breathing stone wrapped in air and memory, once slept beneath ice. It may again, but for now, it is awake, stretching, becoming, listening, and we, the brief voices, the flash of warmth in geological time, are here with it. For a moment, for a chapter, for a breath, maybe, the planet is dreaming us into its next story.